but I had kind of planned for you to do a presentation on structuring a captive QOF for anybody out there, an investor who might be considering forming his or her own qualified opportunity fund, either to invest in his or her own deals or into or alongside another qualified opportunity fund. So if you could walk us through that, that would be tremendous.
Absolutely. So sharing my screen now, and want to make sure that that you've got this. And
Yep.
so this is basically opportunity zones on a page, and this is kind of the how about what you got to do. And so the first part of this is that you have to start with a capital gain from a sale to an unrelated party. And then you've got to put that gain into a qualified opportunity fund within 180 days of the sale, or if it was through a partnership or an S corporation, within 180 days of the tax filing deadline. So if it came through a partnership or an S corp, you've actually got until roughly September the 11th in order to place that into a qualified opportunity fund. Now we had a bunch of extensions because of COVID, which effectively allows us to go all the way back till October 4th of 2019 for any gain that came off of a sale of a stock, and go all the way back to January 1st, 2019 that came from any sale of a partnership interest or an S corp, or assets that are held by a partnership interest or an S corp. So it basically allows us to go way, 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 way back. And so what is relevant within this is that for everybody that's on the pitch fest right here, that's looking at deals, and if you find one that you really like, absolutely go ahead and make your investment into that. And if you've got a March 31st deadline, get it in there before the March 31st deadline. If for whatever reason you got a little bit, you're like, hey, you know what? I want to have some calls. I want to talk to some folks. I want to look at lots of different deals, but you're still looking at that March 31st deadline. This is a way where you can park some cash until to get it in by that deadline, and then be able to have some time to do your due diligence and to do diligence on other funds. Because out of a self-directed or a captive QOF, you can make investments into other deals. Now, not every single fund that's out there is going to be able to accommodate a direct investment into their deals, but there are some that do. And so this could be a way for you to be able to get your money into a fund by a deadline, and then have flexibility in how you want to allocate those funds. So, and then I'm going to run through another strategy as well that I think is actually very relevant too. That could be an additional time-saving method on this for how you can use and take advantage of a captive fund in order to be able to make investments into your own deals and or into other funds, and to be able to get some flexibility as it relates to those timeframes. So once again, you got to get your money into a QOF. Well, interestingly, a QOF is just a partnership or a corporation formed for the purpose of investing in opportunity zone property, and that elects to be treated as a qualified opportunity fund. And the way you do that, and I'm going to get into that here in a second, but you do that by filing a fairly simple self-certification via IRS Form 8996, which is literally a 2-page form. And then the QOF has to invest 90% of its assets in qualified opportunity zone property. And it's got a testing deadline on when it's got to hit those requirements. Now, it's got to be equity that goes into the QOF, so you can't drop debt in there. But there's some instances where if you know that you're going to have a capital gain that's coming up and you want to go ahead and get some cash either into your own QOF or into a deal, you can drop that cash into your QOF in the form of a loan, and then you can drop your equity from your capital gain at a later date, and you can then repay that loan and still have and preserved your 180 days and your investment into the QOF as a qualifying investment. And that's really important that we hit that, right? Because if you put in money into a QOF as equity that's non-capital gains, it's going to be a non-qualifying investment. So to the extent that you need to do that, make sure that you bring it in as a loan. So let's let's go through this test. So let's go through kind of the testing period about when you drop your cash into a QOF and some of the timing considerations of that. So effectively, if you form and fund your QOF prior to June 30th, you're going to have a December 31st asset testing deadline. And the reason why that happens is that you've got to hold 90% of your assets in qualified opportunity zone property. And this is determined by the average of the percentage of QOZP held on the last day of the first 6-month period and then the last day of the fund's taxable year. But if you see this little asterisk right here, this says that if proceeds are held continuously as cash, cash equivalents, or debt instruments with a term of 18 months or less, and there's no related party carve-outs on here, you could be to anybody, QOFs may exclude from the 90% test any contributions received within 6 months of the asset testing date. So let's say you drop cash, you form your fund tomorrow, and you drop cash into it on the Ides of March, so March 15th. And so you now have elected that your fund began on March 1st because it's got to be effective when you put your money into it. And so now you go 6 months out. So effectively what you're going to end up doing, so you count out 6 months. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So on August 30th, that's your first 6-month testing date. But because you still have it in cash or a cash equivalent, and I'm going to walk you through how you can use that as a kind of a neat little tool to be able to actually get some return in the market or some return that's not just sitting in a bank account waiting for you to do something with the money, that you get to disregard that cash on this testing date, which then pushes you to the December 31st testing date. So effectively, by setting up your own captive fund, you've effectively bought yourself until December 31st, where you really actually have to make some decisions and get this money to work. Now, similarly, if you form between July 1st and December 31st, your first testing date, because you don't get the 6-month period there, it's going to be the last day of the fund's taxable year. So whether you form on July 1 or December 30th, your first testing date will be December 31st. But once again, if it's held in cash or cash equivalent, you get to postpone that date until the following June 30th. And so, and I think that what we're talking about here is stuff for people that are doing prior to June 30th. And so, especially if you're going to looking at that March 31st deadline, that you're going to effectively have until December 31st to put that cash to work. Now, where this is relevant is that let's say that you've got $1 million of gain, right? And so instead of paying taxes on that, or if you had $1 million in gain from 2019 or 2020, you drop that cash into the QOF within 180 days or by the March 31st deadline if it was in 2020 or 2019 and you're pushing that out. And then because this is sitting in cash, right, you have the ability to be able to loan that money back to yourself as long as the loan is on 18 months or less, which it's going to have to be 18 months or less because you've got a 12/31 deadline to deploy that capital. You are going to be able to loan that money back to yourself, and then you can do whatever you want to with the money in the interim. You could put it in the market, you could put it into Bitcoin, you could put it in Ethereum, you could loan it to your best friend's cousin's brother, Vino, and he could do hard money transactions with it, whatever. The key point is that you need to be able to cycle the money back into your fund by 12/31 of 21. Now, if during that time, and so this is where this becomes very advantageous for being able to utilize this to look at other deals, to talk with other funds that are out there. And if they have a QOZB, so I'm going to advance the screen here into this one. If they've got, so there's another fund that's out there, right? And they've got an active qualified opportunity zone business that you're interested in doing. And you've got an investment to make. And this is particularly the case if it's a sizable enough investment that most funds are set up or that they would be willing to look at having the ability to be able to take a direct investment into their QOZB from your QOF. And so they've got their own third-party fund that's out there, but they will allow you through your fund to take that money and to deposit it into their QOZB. So an example of exactly this is Hall Family Labs. So they've got their own fund, and they've got a number of portfolio operating companies that are that they're doing business with, so that they've made investments into. And so if you have an interest in placing money into one of their deals, and I mean, unless you got a sizable amount to invest, it would probably be you would probably be looking at one of their deals. But if you have a sizable amount, they could probably accommodate you into a number of their portfolio companies. You can make a direct investment directly into their QOZB. We actually helped a client do exactly this, and the guys at Hall were fantastic at in accommodating this, and we were able to pull it off and to make it happen for them. So there's other funds, and there's lots of other sponsors that are interested in exactly this. And there's a number of QOZBs that are out there that are hunting capital from QOFs, that where you through your QOF could make an investment directly into their QOZB and be able to take advantage of this. I've seen a bunch of stuff that's popping up in the chat, and so I'm going to see if there's some questions in here if there's any specifically. Yeah, so you cannot invest directly into a QOF, but you can invest directly into the QOZB. So this is really important, and we call this a two-story house. So effectively, if you had a QOF up here, you could not invest into this QOF. That's a no-no, because you would be above the ceiling of that two-story house. Now, if you have your own QOF and there's another QOF that's out there, and then there's a QOZB that's underneath it, you can make an investment directly into that QOZB, and you're totally fine. Once again, that's inside of the two-story house. Now, the other piece, and this is something that you got to be careful with, is that if you drop your money into your own QOZB, you can't then make an investment into another QOZB. That's not going to work either, because once again, that's going into the basement of your two-story house. Basements and ceilings, no go. First and second floor, you're good to go. And so and this becomes a strategy about timing, that if you need to, and if you get stretched out over and pass your 12/31 deadline, and you need to drop, you haven't found another deal, but you're like, you know what, I've got to drop this money into the QOZB so that way I can still preserve the benefit. You can drop your cash into the QOZB, and then that gets you started on this 31/62/55 month business plan. It's 55 if you put it in before June 30th, which you may or may not want to do, just based upon kind of your preference. Now, a lot of folks have dropped their cash into a QOZB and they're still out there hunting deals. Well, what they can do is they can take that cash and they can pull it back from the QOZB up to the QOF. And as long as they're not doing that, and then if they want to flush this out, they can flush it back into a different QOZB. And as long as they're not doing that on June 30th or 12/31, and they cycle the cash up to the QOF and then back down into another QOZB, then you're going to be fine, and you're going to actually be okay relative to your testing dates. Now, what you want to be careful of is you don't leave it up in the QOF too long, because that could once again blow and get wonky with your 90% calculations. But and this goes into kind of another question about, all right, so if I drop my money into a captive QOF, can I invest into another QOF, right? Let's say that they don't have the ability to be able to do this, where they're not okay making an exception, or they don't have the structure to be able to take an investment directly into their QOZB. So that would look like this, to where you've got your QOF set up, and then you put your money into it, and you're like, well, all right, I really, really, really want to go into Urban Catalyst, right? And Urban Catalyst is not set up to where they can take an investment directly into one of their QOZBs. I'm not sure if they've got multiple, if they've only got one QOZB or what, but they say, listen, we would love to take your money, but we can't do it directly into the QOZB. And I'm not saying that they do that or not. I'm not exactly sure whether they can accommodate directly into a QOZB or not, but I'm inclined to believe that they can't. So what you can do is you could put your money into the QOF, and then when you decide that you ultimately want to make your investment into this other QOF, you distribute that money back out to yourself. What that's going to do is that's going to trigger an inclusion event. But that inclusion event will then be reported on this year's tax return. And so not necessarily the most desirable result, but if you have to do it because you're like, listen, I really want to get into that deal, this is an avenue where you can. I actually had a guy another play or a potential play was they and this is exactly what they did is they dropped the money into their QOF, and then they actually put it down into their QOZB, and they said, listen, we really want to be in this other QOF, and we really like their deal. And so they said, we're amending our 31-month business plan. We're deciding to return some of the capital to the QOF. The QOF then dispersed it back to the investor. That triggered an inclusion event, and then they put the money into another QOF. And so according to the letter of the law, there's nothing wrong with that. Now, if you're doing it as a plan to get more time, that's going to be a problem. But if you legitimately dropped it in and then you're like, listen, this is the deal that I got to go into, people's plans change all the time. And so I don't think that the IRS could fault you for the fact that you decided that you ultimately wanted to get into another fund. So that's how you can structure a captive QOF. Those are the periods of time. This is what it would look like if you're investing into a third-party QOZB. These are the documentation requirements that you're going to need to set up your own QOF. You got to have articles of organization with Tax Cut and Jobs Act language. So there's a lot of kind of debate out there in the industry right now about the 8996 requirements and what that means. And it technically says that in your organizational documents that you have delineated that you're going to be a qualified opportunity fund. So we belt and suspenders this thing. We put it in as an amendment to, as an addendum to your articles. Some states don't allow you to do that. So we then definitely add it into your operating agreement that you're going to comply with the 90% test and everything else. And then we do a specific compliance resolution that also delineates that. And then that also has some information about how you're going to build your audit trail to document all this stuff. The other thing is that this QOF needs to be a corporation or a partnership. And so you need an EIN showing that it's an actual partnership, which a multi-member LLC will do. So this is what we do at OZ Pros, is that we set these things up for people all the time. And this documentation package is what we put together for people. And then we specifically include in there documentation for these related party loans so that way people can get some return on their money while they're trying to figure out what they're going to do with it. And so whether that's at the QOF level or at the QOZB level, you have the ability to be able to loan that money back to yourself as long as it's under 18-month terms. And so we put that in there as well inside of our package that we've got related party loan docs for people to use. So let's talk about taxes due, and let's talk about like kind of what the structure of that looks like. We've got a deadline of 12/31 of 21 this year. We've got a March 31st deadline for anything that was back in 2019. And then your taxes are going to become due and payable on December 31st, 2026. And they're going to be payable in effectively January of 2027 or April if you're pushing it out to when your filing is. And then 12/31 of 2047 is the deadline to get the step up in basis to fair market value. Now, what's interesting is that the taxes that you're going to pay are going to be based upon the value of either your original gain or the value of your new investment. So if the value of your new investment goes down, basically because of depreciation, that can be an avenue to where you could lessen the amount of taxes that you have to pay in 2026. So let's talk about just kind of the brass tacks of how you actually do this and how you come up with the numbers that are going to go into your captive QOF. And I want to make sure that we're doing okay on time. Are we drawing close to? And I'm not sure if Jimmy's in
So
here.
we're doing good here. Actually, I think I'd like to wrap up in the next about 10 or 11 minutes, and we do
Oh
have a
man,
lot of
I'm gonna be
questions.
done way before that. So
Okay,
I'm
good.
gonna
We've got a ton of questions. So
perfect.
yep.
So on your 89.49, you are going to you're going to delineate where you had the gain. Now this animation is a little bit jacked up because it doesn't follow through on what your basis was and that kind of thing. But let's assume you had $1 million in proceeds, and let's just assume for this matter that you bought it for nothing, which obviously isn't going to work. So you would ultimately have $1 million in gain. And then you're going to indicate what the fund is and the EIN of the fund directly underneath that, and then how much of the gain you're going to be deferring via your investment into this opportunity fund. And so you're going to put a negative $1 million there, and then that's going to notify the IRS that you are engaging in an opportunity fund transaction, even if it's your own fund. So then you're also going to fill this out on the 8997. You're going to delineate how much you're deferring of your current year capital gains, and then you're going to show the total QOF investment holdings at the end of the year, and that's going to happen on your 8997. The next my slideshow is not wanting to continue going, so I'm going to continue on. So the final document that you're going to file, and hopefully my slideshow will catch up. I'm going to stop sharing here for a second, and then maybe it'll rebound. But the final document that you're going to file is Form 8996, and that's how you're going to that's basically going to how you're going to certify and self-certify to the IRS that you are a qualified opportunity fund. And that self-certification is that you got none of your property in opportunity zone assets. And the easiest way to do that is by dropping your cash into a QOZB. And then on the second page of that QOZB, or the 8996, is where that QOZB is going to give you information about the value of your investment and some particulars that you put on that second page. But that is, and it's important that you go through and you yourself, or that your QOZB that you're investing in, do the analytics in order to be able to come up with those numbers. But once you have those numbers, either from a QOZB or that you've come up with, it's a fairly simple entry into those line items that you're going to be completing on the 8996. So that kind of in a nutshell is how you do a captive slash, self-directed qualified opportunity fund, and the benefits of that, and and how you can utilize that kind of in your strategy relative to being able to diversify into opportunity zones, and to be able to maybe be able to do some of your own stuff and make investments into some of these other funds that you've got interest in. So the great thing about the opportunity zone is that it's flexible enough that you don't have, it's not an either or proposition, and that you can effectively kind of get the best of both worlds. So Jimmy, let's jump into some of those questions.
Awesome. Yeah, let's do it. A ton of good questions here. I don't know where to begin. Let's see. First of all, are your slides going to be available? Are we making these slides available, Ashley?
Absolutely.
Okay, so I'll put those on the Pitch Day website within the next day or two. I'm going to have all of the recordings and all of the slide decks available at ozpitchday.com. Give me a day or two to get all that sorted out, but we'll make this slide presentation available. Brandon asks, can you 1031 into an OZ fund? How does that impact depreciation payback?
Yeah, so no, that so 1031 is basically one of the other kind of code provisions, just like 1400Z. And so it's an election that you make. And so you either have to elect under 1031, section 1031, or you have to elect under section 1400Z, and you can't do both. And so now we've had lots of conversations about the differences between 1031 and opportunity zones. But I think that if you really run the math on it, that, a lot of times opportunity zones come out ahead. They're way more flexible. They give you way more ability to be able to be nimble and to do stuff that's kind of outside of the box, as opposed to 1031 having a very, very, very square box. So the short answer is no, and happy to talk about and talk through the different ups, downs, sideways, pros, cons of 1031s versus opportunity zones. And also, we regularly use Oz and Oz deals in order to salvage failed 1031s. Because of the flexibility of the timeframes, it gives us a little bit more to work with, particularly with the COVID extensions, that we're able to go back and salvage a lot of failed 1031s and be able to get their capital gains shifted into opportunity zone deals.
Excellent. Great answer, Ashley. We've got time for a few more questions here. So we've got a lot coming in. Thank you to everybody for participating and sending your great questions. Mitch asks, do only individuals invest their gains in a QOF, or can LLCs also invest in OZ funds?
So it's going to be rare. So ultimately, it's the taxpayer that's got to make the investment into the QOF. And so it's going to be rare that a partnership actually is the ultimate taxpayer on a gain, but it could be. So a partnership, if it chooses to invest into a QOF, it absolutely can. And it's actually one of the reasons why they gave that 180 days from the partnership tax filing deadline, is because it goes to the partnership first. And then the partnership can either elect to make the deferral, or it can say, no, we're going to pass this out to the partners. That's the reason why there's 180 days after the partnership tax filing deadline, because some people may be in a partnership that they don't know, and they might get a gain on their K1 and be like, oh man, what am I going to do about this? And so then they've got until that September 11th deadline to roll those over. So accordingly, yes, it could be a partnership. Most people choose not to, because this is a way to kind of break out of the partnership and to do their own thing. And so a lot of times, this is what we end up doing. I've got 4 partners in a deal. I end up setting a captive QOF for each one, and then they go into the deal on their own through their own fund, so that they can make their own investments and they can get the flexibility back of their own decision making. And they like that, or at least the ones that I've dealt with. Now, there's been a couple where the partnership is like, nah, man, I just want to do this because we've got a great thing going. And so I trust this guy, let him make all the decisions, and I'm just going to get my K1 at the end. So I hope that answers your question. But typically, it's where the partners distribute the gain and then they invest through individually into their own stuff.
Right on. Good answer. James asks, have you heard of any government affiliated entities creating a QOF, say a redevelopment authority or a CDFI somewhat affiliated with a municipal government?
So I've heard of lots of people talking about it, and we've dealt with a bunch of them, right? Because it just makes sense for these local communities to have their own fund. It gets really tough when you're talking about a governmental organization that's actually going to be doing a securities offering to raise money for a fund. And when it comes time to, for them to make the decision and for somebody to sign off on that, everybody starts getting really nervous about what the securities implications are going to be. And so typically what we've seen is that they like to use a group that they've partnered with, whether that's a quasi-governmental organization or a development, corporation or something like that, that they actually become the fund manager. And then they work closely with the municipality or the nonprofit or whatever it is in order to be able to make it happen, which typically streamlines the process. I was a consultant on for a fairly substantial nonprofit educational institution, and it was really tough for the powers that be to get their heads around, okay, how are we going to do this? How do we need to put it out for bid? How are we going to make sure that we're partnered with the right person? And so it was a lot cleaner for a private group to just launch it and run with it, and then say, hey, listen, we're working closely with this organization or in this area, and this is the benefit that we're going to deliver for that.
Right. Good answer there. Jim asks, so do you need a 2-tiered entity structure? Can the QOF not own the real estate or the business?
Yeah. So that's actually a great question. No, you do not. And you can absolutely own operating business stuff or property. So you can own qualified opportunity zone business property directly through a QOF. The challenge is, and I pointed it out on that sheet and on that page that I shared, is that you have a 6-month test and a year-end test every year. And so every year you're going to have to make sure that you have 90% of your money in qualified opportunity zone property. And so that can be really tough for a real estate deal that takes longer than 6 months to a year. And then it also gets really sticky when you're talking about a business where you might have moving parts that you need to move around with cash. And so there, when you drop it down into a QOZB, you get a 70% asset test, you get a 55 or a 31-month working capital safe harbor, you get all of these other kind of accoutrements that I think are a lot more advantageous to having it down at that QOZB. There's maybe one or two situations where I've said that a QOF owning it directly makes sense. And that was for a woman that was buying a completed townhome that satisfied the new test, and that that was the only asset that they were going to manage and own. And that was it. And so they had like $250,000 and they plunked it into this new asset. They didn't have to worry about the newer substantial improvement test, and they were able to just go to the races. And so it cut down on a tax return. And so it made sense for her to do it directly.
Well, that's great. Thanks, Ashley. We're coming up on time here. I want to get in an afternoon break before our next pitch starting in 10 minutes, but I like to drag these things out as long as I can. So I'll get to a couple more questions here. By the way, if we don't get to your questions today, you can email Ashley. You can find his team and email him at info@ozpros.com. And I'll also put up a link where you can schedule a strategy call with him. He normally charges big bucks for those strategy calls. He's an attorney, right? So, but I've got a discount with Ashley Tison. If as an Opportunity DB subscriber or follower, you can visit ozpros.com/opportunitydb and you can save some money on that strategy call. But let's do one or two more questions.
So Jimmy, just to mention on that too, I know that they're booked kind of far out, and if people go to the website, that it might be booked and booked up. Mm-hmm. We've got an option for an emergency one. So if somebody's got a question that is like, they're like, listen, I got to get this answered and I got to get it fast, send us an email at that info@ozpros.com for an emergency strategy call. And then we'll get you some dates and we'll get you squeezed in at some point in time. Because I know that it's booked far out because of this March 31st deadline. The other thing that I want to throw out there to folks is that if you want to get a captive fund set up, it's taken around a week, and it depends on what jurisdiction to get the actual state entity set up. And then you got to get an EIN. And sometimes the IRS gets those back fast. Sometimes it's a little bit delayed. And then you got to have both of those in order to be able to go to your bank and get a bank account set up. And you have to have that bank account set up to get the cash in order to hit that deadline. If somebody is running and bumping up on a deadline, we've got some shelf funds that we've set up that have bank accounts already established, and they can accept your money. And then as part of that, when we sell you the shelf fund, you get all of this stuff assigned to you, and it's your bank account. So we've tried to make this as user-friendly as possible and to accommodate as many people as we can. So just want to put that out there to folks as well.
Right. Sounds good. Okay. One more question. Actually, two more questions, but they're related here. These questions are from Eric and Michael. I'll ask them together. How typical is it that QOZBs make an accommodation to receive investment from a smaller investor's QOF? And Eric's question is, do you know if you were to set up a partnership that was designed to invest in a bunch of... Actually, that's a separate question. I didn't understand this question before. Let's get to that first question first.
So the question is how many are out there that'll accept money from a smaller QOF?
Correct. Yeah. How often do you see that?
So aside from the kind of the institutional players, like they don't have that. I mean, that's not in their playbook from the get-go, right? I mean, that's not what they were envisioning. And a lot of them aren't set up to be that. But I think that a lot of, even some of the bigger funds, like Hall, that was definitely not in their original playbook. But then they saw that there's a bunch of people out there that have put money into QOFs, and that it really makes sense to try and figure out a way to take money directly into their QOZBs. So I think that it's becoming more widespread. And certainly every fund manager that we talk to that we're helping to get up and launched, we say, absolutely, you need to make sure that you've got the ability to take funds both into your QOF and into your QOZB, specifically for this reason.
Right. And then final question here. I misread this one before, but I'm going to give it to you anyway. Eric wants to know if you were to set up a non-QOF partnership that was designed to invest in a bunch of the QOFs, maybe from today's presentations, do the QOF benefits pass through to all members or partners in the partnership?
No,
Essentially,
it's going to be
funds.
it, it's a non-qualifying investment from the get-go.
Yeah.
And so you could invest directly into QOZBs that way, right? And you're just not going to get the 10-year step up in basis to fair market value. But to Eric's point earlier that, I mean, you get to invest in some great deals. And so that might be worth it because, you're like, all right, I'm just going to plug it in. And interestingly is that because it's a non-qualifying investment, you should actually be able to invest that directly into a fund that's accepting, non-capital gains money because it's going to be non-qualifying one way or another. It doesn't matter whether it's from an individual or from a fund that's on top of that, like a fund-to-fund arrangement. I actually don't think that would be a problem if it's a non-qualifying investment. But I haven't really thought about that, so I may be wrong on that, but I think that I'm right.
Okay, well, follow up with your Skunkworks group. Ashley
Absolutely.
is engaged with several different professional organizations that he meets with on a regular basis. So that might be a question you can throw out to the group of OZ
We're definitely going to
experts.
cover that in the Skunkworks call, and because that's actually a good one, because
Yeah.
that could be the answer to fund arrangements, right? Is that, hey, and that could be the answer how you go to institutional capital as well, to say, listen, yeah, you're a fund, but you're not looking for the OZ benefits, and these are just gravy. That's the
Correct.
reason why we set ours up so that you could take that directly into the QOZB. I know for a fact that you could take it into the QOZB and it's not an issue. It's just like any other, partnership that's going to have another partner in the deal. So
Right.
the question is whether a QOF, if they did that, if that would blow their status as a QOF, but I don't think it would.
Yeah, it's a good question. We're going to leave it there because I do want to take a quick 3 or 4 minute break before our next fund presentation. We have 5 more funds that we'll be presenting today. The next one starts at 3:10 p.m. Eastern time. It'll be Michael Episcope with Origin Investments. 5 more funds presenting today, and then at 4:30 p.m. Eastern time, we'll get into the happy hour mixer hosted by Ozworks Group. I'm really looking forward to that. That's going to be a really fun interactive session this time. Ashley, we've got a lot of questions that went unanswered. Unfortunately, we ran out of time, but I just sent your email address in the chat. If you have a question for Ashley, blow them up, info@ozpros.com, or you can schedule your strategy call with Ashley at that link that I provided in the chat as well. Ashley, thank you very much. I'm going to take a quick 2 or 3 minute break here, and then we'll return at 3:10 p.m. with the next presentation.
Thanks, Jimmy. Appreciate the opportunity to present. And can I stay in as a panelist and answer some of these questions?
You can. Yeah, I'll let you hang out here for a few more minutes.
Awesome. All right. Cheers.